This is your urgent call to action. We are all called to lead in a world in chaos, crisis, and turmoil. Join a pivotal global movement for change to transform the leadership crisis worldwide. Will you play it safe, or will you wake up, step up, and speak out? Like Nelson Mandela did for South Africa and the world, we need a radical new way to think, act, and lead, leading boldly into the future. Join host Anne Pratt, a Harvard Fellow and multi-awarded businesswoman, and unlock the best version of yourself to revolutionize leadership with what the world needs now.
Greetings to all you future bold leaders. Thank you for joining us from around the world. My name is Anne Pratt. I'm formerly from South Africa, and I relocated abroad to attend a Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative Fellowship in beautiful Boston in the United States of America. Today, our thoughtful, bold leader joins us from the West African country, officially known as the Republic of Sierra Leone. He has traveled a unique journey from the battlefield to the classroom and to the boardroom. He is the founding Dean of the African Leadership University Business School. He is a member of the Thinkers 50 Radar Class of 2022, as well as the American Mensa Society. He is also a seasoned scholar who graduated from the U.S. Military Academy, West Point, as well as the universities of Columbia and Capello in the United States of America. He is a TEDx speaker, an author, and a practitioner in leadership, management, and organizational development. He is also a catalyst of change. As the CEO and founder of BCA Leadership, he has touched the lives of around 2,000 people, aspiring leaders across the African continent, and crafted the Made in Africa Leadership Conference. Stay with us as he shares more about leadership in and out of his military uniform, how he got shot up in war, how to lead and stay alive, and thirdly, being summoned by the President of Sierra Leone. We warmly welcome my dear colleague and friend, Dr. Modupe Taylor-Pearce, and welcome to Leading Boldly into the Future. So Modupe, what a great honor to have you join us in this conversation today. I cannot wait to hear more, to learn more, and for you to share your wonderful insights. Thank you. Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Thank you, Anne. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. You have had a remarkable life. I think, when I read a little about you and your background, you've lived in multicultural environments, born and raised in Sierra Leone, and then, of course, you spent some time in Ghana and Kenya, and then you came to the USA later in life. What was that early childhood experience in terms of growing up in these different countries? And of course, in a country in Sierra Leone also going through its own challenges. How has this multicultural, multi-international experience shaped you, do you think?
Certainly, and it has helped me in the sense that it helped me to understand both the similarities in various African cultures and some of the differences. I was blessed to have grown up in Sierra Leone and Ghana and Kenya. And I also grew up at a time when each of those countries went through certain levels of, let's call it, upheaval. I still remember as a child being quickly bundled by my mother away from school because there were some school demonstrations and it was election time and we were not allowed to go out because there was a fear that they were kidnapping children and basically performing ritual sacrifices of them as a means to get positions of power.
Yeah.
I also remember as a child, teenager-ish, in Ghana being frog marched up and down Kotaka International Airport by a drunken soldier at gunpoint because I had made the mistake of running up the grass where apparently we were not supposed to run, but there was no sign saying, don't run up the grass. But this was during the early days of the Rawlings military junta, and the soldiers were frankly drunk with power, both metaphorically and also physically. They were drugged.
Yeah.
I remember times in Kenya when Robert Oko was assassinated and murdered, and folks were the tension was palpable, amongst my parents, and this was during the time of Arap Moi. And it also happened that I went to the same youth group at church with Robert Oko's daughter. So I saw a bit firsthand at what happens when leaders make certain decisions and how it impacts the rest of us.
Yes.
And then that certainly translated into my, brief military career, where I learned a lot about leadership at West Point. And then I returned to Sierra Leone after learning about leadership to see, at a time when the country was in the civil war. And I saw various qualities of leadership from pretty good to abysmal. And the thing about when you see leadership during wartime is that wartime contracts significantly the time lag between a leader's decisions and the effects.
Sure.
Or the consequences or the benefits. And in wartime, I got to see, and I learned a very simple rule, which was when leaders make poor decisions, their people lose their lives. And in peacetime, their people lose their livelihoods.
Yes.
The opposite is also true. So these were some of the experiences that I got to see and experience firsthand as a child in multiple countries within Africa.
Yeah, that's so profound, Modupe. As you were talking, it made me think of even this current moment in the world where we're dealing with these monumental crises, the existential threat of climate change. So having had these multifaceted experiences, in this moment in time, what are the big leadership challenges, and concerned about what leaders today need to address and what we need to rise to in this moment?
And I must confess that in general terms, I concern myself the most about the continent of Africa.
Yeah.
And I recognize that your question is a global question, but you will forgive me for focusing my answer on really what leaders in Africa need to focus on.
Absolutely.
And part of the reason for that is because I believe that many Western countries are blessed with certainly better training in leadership and quality of leadership decisions sort of per capita than we are in Africa. And we see that in the outcomes that we see in Africa. So what our leaders in Africa need to really focus on, ensuring that the people that they serve as leaders are truly being served. Now, there is a perspective that leadership is a position, or that leadership is a right, or leadership is an honor. And in truth, true leadership is a service. It's a service that a person provides to people, and those people are the constituents, the followers, whatever terminology you want to use. But when one starts thinking of it as a service, almost like a waiter serving, then one starts to adjust their thinking into understanding that, first of all, your performance is determined by the people you serve and how they derive value from that.
Yeah.
Secondly, it helps you to understand that if the people you serve are not benefiting, then quite frankly, it speaks to you as a rather mediocre waiter when it comes to a thing called leadership. So when the things that we as leaders need to focus on in Africa are the problems that the majority of Africans are dealing with. And the problems that the majority of Africans are dealing with are issues like lack of education, poor health care, poor infrastructure. Every single problem that exists in Africa has been solved by somebody else in Africa.
That's a profound statement. And Modupe, do you have perhaps one example of that?
Thank you so much. Absolutely. I run a small organization called Breakfast Club Africa, where we support leaders with connecting with each other. And we even do things called needs and leads, where we connect people so that, somebody's need, maybe somebody else might have a lead to that. And one of the interesting things that happened and I got the idea from when I was running the African Leadership University, and we had a student, one of our learners is a manager in a construction company in Egypt. And that was his 9 to 5. His 5 to 9 was actually being a fruit crop developer, and he needed a market for it. And so, one time we were doing a needs and leads, and lo and behold, there was a Ghanaian lady. She had, I think, resigned from a tech company or one of these Vodafone companies, but she was actually in the business, not of farming, but of organizing farmers and creating a market for them, sort of to the supermarket.
Yeah.
But she recognized that in Ghana, there were certain fruits that just weren't going to grow very well there. And so she had a market, she had a demand for it, but she didn't have a supplier. We got the two together. And, the Moroccan guy basically found a market, started sending containers of fruit. There was a business. One person's problem, another person had a solution to it.
Can you share with us, take us back in time, Modupe, around where you had a very difficult moment, a dark moment? How did you feel at the time? What was the aha moment, and how did you pivot out of that?
First of all, I have to say I am so thrilled that you describe my life as young life, because I keep telling my children who are in college now that I'm still young, and they don't believe it. Even they think that anybody who's over 50 is officially old. In 2013, I was summoned to the office of the president.
Of Sierra Leone. You're talking about Sierra Leone. Yeah.
Because there were complaints about me that I had stoked ethnic rivalries and was being unhelpful to the economic cause in Sierra Leone. The background to this was the fact that I had about 6 or 9 months before been appointed the executive secretary of the American Chamber of Commerce in Sierra Leone.
Yeah.
And the American Chamber of Commerce exists to support, the facilitation of trade. Well, it just so happened that I discovered that the American Chamber of Commerce, which I had taken over, had been silently hijacked by a small fraction of business people who were using it specifically just to further their own ends at the expense of the country. Yeah. And this level of selfish corruption was not necessarily propagated, but was tolerated by certain public and diplomatic officials. And I blew the whistle.
And who did you blow it to?
I blew it first to the ambassador, first to the board, then to the ambassador.
To the US ambassador.
And then to the wider membership cycle. And then eventually I blew it to a couple of senators in the US. Well, at least I wrote a letter to them.
Yeah.
And I discovered very quickly what it means to be blackballed. It was a dark time, because in a small country, when you choose to not only stand for truth, but you actually choose to shine a light on corruption, you will find very quickly that you become extremely isolated, because it's not just the quote unquote corrupt people who will leave you alone. It's those people who wish for a less corrupt society, but don't have the courage to stand up for one, who will actually make you feel the most lonely.
Can you share more?
Certainly, I was, in terms of consulting or job opportunities, they've dried up. In terms of social, gatherings, invitations to certain places, those all disappeared.
Yeah.
But, the interesting thing is that when you stand for the right thing,
Yeah.
you will suffer for a little while, but you don't realize how many people are now watching. And eventually, in fact, it didn't take too long. It was about maybe 3 or 4 months. I was contacted by a multinational company that had a branch in Sierra Leone, and they said, gosh, we have a factory here, and we really want to, your help in looking at what's happening with our night shift. We think there's some funny business going on. And so they contracted me and I helped them. It was a multinational company called Heidelberg. And that's weathered the tide for me. Interestingly enough, that started 6 months before the Ebola breakout in Sierra Leone.
Yeah.
And when Ebola hit Sierra Leone, almost every industry tanked, with the exception of 2. One was the medical pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
Because everybody suddenly wanted to be healthy during Ebola.
Yeah.
The second was the cement factory, because in the face of depreciating currency due to poor economy, most people doubled up on their construction work because it was the safest place to park your money.
Of course. So, in fact, you were positioned in the right place at that time.
But I do want to make clear that the burden of leadership, when one wants to do those things, is that you are going to have to weather the storm of being extremely lonely and extremely isolated.
When did the light bulb go on, and how did you navigate that lonely period?
First of all, I'm the son of missionaries.
Okay.
And my parents, and they're teachers and they're missionaries. So my parents have, in some ways, gone through different things like that. So I learned a bit just, hearing stories from one's parents. I also, because I spent time at West Point, we did a lot of studying of leaders. And even after West Point, I was a big fan of reading leadership biographies. So I read, the biography of whether it's business leaders like Jack Welch or Lee Iacocca, or, political leaders like certainly Mandela, Gandhi. And one of the things that is common to all of those is that they all go through those dark moments. And what unites all of them is a faith, just a faith that if I hold on to what is right, it will work out in the end. Even if it works out after my death, it will work out. And of course, everybody knows that Mandela had the ultimate faith, because I don't know too many leaders who could hold on to that for 27 years. Yeah. But he did.
Yeah.
And it did work out in the end. Mm-hmm. Thank God mine wasn't 27 years, it was 3 months. So, yeah. But at the end of the day, when you, by reading and by learning from what others have gone through, who share their experiences, even Paul Kagame, 1998 to 2003, nobody thought he was a genius.
Yeah.
Okay. Including in his own country.
Yeah.
Okay. He didn't have that level of support. Where today, now it's like, oh, wow, this guy's great. He's done well. So you go through those periods, and having seen that and read about it and knowing that other people have gone through it makes it easier then for me, or made it easier than for me, to know that, hang in there, it will work out. It also helps that I had a coach who, also helped with some conversations to kind of help me to see the long term and to realize that, it's always darkest before the dawn.
Of course. And how did you feel once you came out of it? How did you feel once, you got that assignment, you were in a well-positioned industry? How did it make you feel about the whole experience, coming out of it as well as you did?
Interestingly enough, it didn't, how should I put it? It wasn't like, oh, wow, yes, how you like me now? No, it wasn't. It was almost a feeling of gratitude and exhaustion.
Yeah. Mental, physical, emotional, spiritual.
More mental and emotional exhaustion. I wouldn't. In my case, it wasn't physical exhaustion, but certainly the mental exhaustion, and that's the biggest part, Anne, of being a leader.
Yeah.
Is the battle that you have to wage in your mind. The people who will shape what happens 5 years from now are those people who are courageous enough to envision it, communicate it, and take positive steps towards achieving that ideal future, even though they can't guarantee that it will happen, but they have to act like they are absolutely sure. And those people are what we call leaders.
That is so powerful and so profound. And you know what comes to mind, Modupe? You were the first person in Sierra Leone who went to the wonderful US military academy, West Point. To what extent has discipline been a part of exercising leadership in your life? And to what extent do you think discipline is a key component of exercising the kind of bold leadership we need today?
It's been a huge factor, and let me expand on this. First of all, I want to nuance the word discipline. Self-discipline has been a huge factor.
Yeah.
You see, because in Africa, we're very quick to say, oh, yes, I believe in discipline, as long as it's disciplining somebody else.
Of course, that's an important distinction. Yeah.
So it's self-discipline. And yes, West Point taught me about self-discipline. West Point, I learned that the first person you lead is yourself. And if you don't lead yourself well, you actually don't really earn the right to lead others as well. And in fact, I'll give you a little tip. Do a little study for yourself and look around Africa and see what correlation there is with leaders who demonstrate self-discipline and their country's economic fortunes. In fact, you would probably find, Anne, that there's a correlation between how, excuse my French, fat or overweight leaders are and how their countries perform economically. Because part of even your self-discipline is the self-discipline of managing your body.
Of course.
It's a generalization, and there are some exceptions. But you can look at political leaders, country leaders, okay?
Yeah.
And you see there's a correlation. Countries like Rwanda who are doing very well, or even Ghana, Botswana, and you look at their leaders, okay? Now, again, it's a generalization because, some people maybe, as they say, they just genetically have certain genes. But, I have yet to see a country that is led by an overweight, big-bellied man.
Or woman.
Or woman. And to see that country's economic performance or, socio-political performance go in a positive direction during the tenure of that person.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting point. And of course, you've alluded to Mandela, to Nelson Mandela, and we'll come back to that now. How do you think it programs us, Modupe, in terms of being disciplined in other parts of our lives?
It programs us by getting us to understand that in the same way that a waiter in a restaurant, there are days when that waiter is really not in the mood to serve food.
Of course.
In fact, there may be days when they really can't even stand the smell of some of the food. And yet, for every customer, the good waiter understands showtime, put a smile on, you serve. You make the food sound exciting, etc., regardless of how you feel. That's discipline. That's self-discipline. The same thing happens in leadership.
Yeah.
No leader, and not too many leaders, wake up every day saying, oh my God, I can't wait. Let's go. Let's do this. Okay.
Yeah.
There are times when you're just not in the mood. And there's some decisions that you're not even keen on. Okay. Sometimes those decisions have to do with disciplining somebody else.
Of course.
Or sometimes they have to do with, eschewing certain pleasures for a future gain or doing that. And this is, and there may be times when the people that, you serve may look at you and say, we really, really, really don't like this. Okay. We really don't like this, but it's only because it's you. We'll go along for a little while.
Sure.
And that is the way that it is. It's almost like a parent. You can't be your child's friend all the time.
Yeah.
You have to be your child's parent.
Of course. And, in the military, Modupe, when I think of your experience, of course, the consequence of not being disciplined and physically showing up in a disciplined way, doing what needs to be done. You made the point earlier around the consequences of, particularly in times of war, are accentuated, and very often that leads to loss of life. I'm struck by your experience, not only at West Point, but also, after West Point, you went back to Sierra Leone during the Civil War, a very protracted 11-year civil war, a devastating time, I'm sure. And can you share with us an example of how do you lead and stay alive? I know you were shot in battle. You've been right on the edge of how do you exercise leadership and physically stay alive. Based on that time, that experience, can you share with us an example of what you've learned about how you lead and stay alive and what happened to you in that time? How did you stay alive?
Yes, I can. It wasn't the easiest of times, and I do want to make this clear. I was not the, Rambo soldier. I was just another 23-year-old officer who, when the bullets started flying, his first instinct was to pee his pants.
Mm-hmm.
But what helped?
And sorry, what year was that? Can you just take us back in time? Just paint a bit.
1994.
1994.
One of the things that I was able to do, and I learned from West Point, was the importance of drill. Just repetition. You go through and do the same drill. And by the way, it's mind-numbing. It's annoying. Yeah. Okay. When you're in the Army, you're like, why do we have to do this again?
Yeah.
But the importance of drills became clear to me when I went into war, because I came in, and we had, I had a couple of soldiers who were mine, and we would go through drills, firefighting drills, fields of fire drills, night vision. We would practice setting up your weapons, etc., talk about things. When the bullets start flying, Anne, excuse my French, your first instinct is to shit your pants and hide.
Yeah.
And it is only the drills that, in a sense, make your brain go to that automatic part of your brain that just kind of say, oh, this is what you do. Yeah. And so you actually end up not even thinking clearly, but you go into autopilot mode. Now, you won't go into autopilot mode if you haven't done it enough times.
I'm with you.
Okay. And that's one of the ways in which we stayed alive. And I was very fortunate that, we had gone through those drills with some of my soldiers. And so when the bullets started flying, we knew what to do.
So what did you do? What did you do? You were personally shot, right?
Yes, it wasn't my finest moment. But yes, it did happen. So, okay. I was shot when we were responding to reports of a rebel incursion. I took a couple of, about a platoon worth of soldiers, and we went, and we were going through this village, and gunfire hit. And when gunfire hit, we did the first thing that we're supposed to do, which we were trained to do, which is you take cover. You take cover and do not return fire.
Yeah.
Why? Where is the gunfire coming from? They come from the north, from the east, from the west.
Sure.
And if you start shooting like you see in the movies, then you're definitely not going to find out. In fact, you're more likely to shoot each other. So, we took cover, tried to understand. And I, you kind of have to think about, because it's not like the bullets are moving at a pace where you can kind of see, go, oh, there you go, it's there. All you just see is somebody go, ah, and you're not sure whether it came from this way or that way. And you don't have exactly a lot of time to go and inspect the body and say, oh, I can see the trajectory of the bullet is like this. So all of those things happen. And we were there. And eventually we figured out which direction things were, the fire was coming from, partially because the enemy, some of them were talking and you could hear their voices. And so I organized, let's train our fire in this direction. But after a while, it was clear that if we were going to get out of there, we needed to surprise the enemy a bit. And I wanted to do what is called a bit of a pincer movement, which is you get a small group to kind of go around and approach the enemy from the side, so that then they would get fields of fire from two places, which would then confuse them. And usually what would happen to an untrained force is they would just basically get up and run and just hightail it out of there. In the process of getting to that pincer movement, I had to cross a small clearing that wasn't terribly well protected. And two of my soldiers crossed before me. And while I was crossing, boom, I got picked off. For the most part, my military experience ended that day in terms of active duty, because I was hit by two bullets, one which hit my elbow and perforated the ulnar nerve. But that was not the serious one. In fact, I didn't even realize it at the time that I was hit in the arm. The one that perforated my femoral nerve that went through my groin essentially paralyzed my leg on the spot.
Wow.
And that's when I discovered a lot about medical, the body, that when your femoral nerve is snapped, your muscles basically just collapse like a balloon that's been popped into.
Sure.
Instantly, your leg becomes half its size and not useful for much other than decorating.
How did you stay alive?
First of all, by the grace of God, because I was bleeding profusely. And thankfully, some of my troops who, risked their lives to run across this clearing, laid covering fire. One of them picked me up in a fireman's carry and ran across back to cover while I was basically screaming because my groin was on his shoulder. And as he ran, it was like I was experiencing more and more bullet wounds. But thankfully, he didn't listen to me, and he just kept running. And we got to safety. And later on, I remember I asked him, I said, why did you guys do that? I mean, you risked your lives for this. And he gave me the most profound and yet simple answer. He said, sir, you are our leader. We couldn't leave you there. You've never done anything wrong to us.
Very profound. Do you still have a connection with the people you served with?
Yes.
You do. Well, we are very grateful, Modupe, that you are here with us to share the story, but it also bears testament to the wonderful leadership quality and example that you set for them. And I guess what I'm hearing is that in that there was a sense of duty and support coming from your people, given the way in which you had served and being a leader for them.
Yeah. When you pour yourself out for the benefit of your people, when they understand that what you're doing, the decisions you're making, puts their interest first. And that's a process that takes time, yes, but when they understand that, then when you need them, they will always be there. And you know the best example of that we have all around us in Africa?
Yeah.
It's mothers.
Of course.
I am continually frustrated, Anne, by our idiotic fixation with putting men in charge in political positions when we have examples of fantastic leadership in front of us every single day. The African mother clearly has a vision for her child.
Yeah.
She sacrifices for her child. She communicates that vision to that child, speaks it into him or her every day.
Yeah.
Okay. She will defend that child, and yet she will discipline that child. She will go without for that child's benefit.
Yeah.
And invariably, that child becomes something because of those sacrifices. And there's a reason why when she says to that child, I need this, that child, who is now a man or a woman, will drop whatever meeting they're in.
Will move heaven and earth. Yeah.
And say, and yet we continue to ignore this example, and we keep choosing mediocrity.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Modupe. And, it reminds me of the African saying that you strike a woman, you strike a rock. And if we think of, the powerful women leaders who have exercised leadership in a very courageous way to make significant changes and overcome great adversities, not only at home, but even at war and, leaders of countries. So it truly does raise a question around the importance of diversity, inclusion, equity, and the extent to which we are bringing women to the table as examples of leaders. I think if we shift to another leader that we both have great admiration and respect for, who was greatly shaped and influenced by his mother, Nelson Mandela. He often said that his mother was his first female best friend. In fact, in his own life, after his father passed away from TB when Madiba was only 11, his mother really gave him up to be raised by King Yunguntaba of the Tembu tribe. I mean, that was an act of selflessness. And to your point, you're right. She communicated to him what she was doing, why she was doing it. She still supported him, visited him, and really shaped his model of leadership in the world. I mean, that's a wonderful example and a wonderful segue into that. Do you have a moment, Modupe, that is a Mandela moment for you? Can you take us back in time to a moment where you witnessed Mandela exercising leadership that made an impact on you and how you choose to live and lead?
I must confess, Anne, that whenever I speak to South African friends who speak of Mandela almost in the first person or have even had a chance to see him live, in person, I feel insanely jealous because I never did have that opportunity. But I must confess that I have, voraciously consumed most of the material that's available about him. And I think that my favorite, though, is the interview that Mandela did. And I'm trying to remember which year it was. It may have been 93 or so in New York. I think it may have been his first trip in New York, and it was a town hall.
Yeah,
and Ted Koppel, exactly.
Yeah. In fact, it was his year of release in 1990 when he came out. And you're right, his first trip abroad.
It was, this was huge deal. I don't know what the ratings were, but I'm sure they were probably through the roof, like a Super Bowl or something. And yet, and I don't know whether he knew it, I suspect he suspected it, it was a trap. Many of the questions that had been set up for him were absolute traps. And, now I'm sure that the journalist would say, well, we wanted to show a balanced and fair representation. But the reality was many of the questions were trying to get Mandela to make commitments to things that, would serve one interest at the expense of the long-term interests of potentially the South African people. And for me, my Mandela moment was when he said, he had the courage to say, and he said, and I'm sure I won't get the quote correct, but he said, it is a mistake for our friends to assume that their enemies must be our enemies.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't just the fact that it was eloquent, which was absolutely great. It was brilliant. But for me, it was the courage that he demonstrated. He was speaking to the very people who certainly had worked hard to get his release.
Yeah.
I mean, so he, by human terms, he should have been grateful to them, and grateful to the point of, whatever you say, I'll do, thank you. But he had the moral courage to understand that, yes, I can be grateful, but that doesn't mean that I have to be gratuitous.
Yeah. And there's a difference.
There's a difference.
Yeah.
And so he had the courage, to stand up, to say that. To say that to the world. Now, by the way, he didn't just stand up to, quote unquote, the Americans or the Jews or the whites. He also stood up to his own ANC folks who wanted to basically, turn South Africa into Zimbabwe. Okay.
Yeah.
So he showed that kind of courage that for me is the Mandela moment, is the courage to speak truth, not just to power, but to those people who can rightly say to you, hey, you owe me. I made you. You owe me. And yet you're able to say to them, you're right. You do pay my bills.
Yeah.
You do pay that, but that doesn't mean that you own me.
Of course.
I may owe you, but you don't own me.
Yeah, a very important distinction. What do you think Mandela would say to the leaders of Africa today and perhaps even the leaders of the world?
To the leaders of Africa, I suspect what he would say is chart your course for Africa. When I took over South Africa or came out of prison, I understood that our journey had to be different from other countries. And even your well-meaning friends will try to prescribe what's right for you, but you need to chart your course, even as you recognize what you're going for. And of course, he would also probably say the things that he's always said about, education being very important, about leaders serve their people. But it would be, I think the biggest thing he would say is, Africa's solutions need to be created by Africa's people, having understood the uniqueness of Africa. And they have to have the courage to sometimes say no to those to whom they owe their very positions.
Of course.
To the world, I suspect what he would say is probably not different from what he said at that town hall, which is that, respect our sovereignty and help us, but don't control us. And, and he would continue to speak truth to power. He had the temerity and the courage and the longevity to understand that some of the same people that were hailing him as the Messiah were the same people who had been calling him terrorists barely 20 years before. So he didn't let their description or their accolades or the opposite, change what he believed was right. And I think that as he looks at the world, if he were advising world leaders, he would be saying to them, folks, give the people in the poor countries a fair shake and support them, but don't control them. because even when you mean well, your solutions may not be appropriate for them.
Yeah, that's a great insight, Modupe. Just shifting gear a little, a couple of fun, fast facts about yourself. I know you love reading and reading voraciously. Can you share with us one of your favorite leadership biographies that you've read and why?
Ooh, that's a tough one because there's so many good ones. Interestingly enough, let me just give a few. Sorry, it's going to be hard to pick one.
Yeah.
I certainly, I loved the story of Jack Welch.
Neutron Jack.
It's a business leadership mega course. But I also loved the story or reading about Richard Branson. Talk about somebody who, like an opportunity hawk.
Yeah.
and he was just, what makes him unique is the fact that he never let fear hold him back, or the fear of failure. Coming closer to Africa, I just actually recently just read a biography that's actually is most people would not have heard of. It's a friend of mine. His name is Dr. David Stuku, and he just wrote a biography where talking about his life, and he rose up to be a managing director of a bank, and he's a coach. But what was interesting about it, there's a confluence. It's they talk about how they say luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's exactly him, because, he came from a small village, where going to some of the top schools was way out of, league. But somebody challenged him about something and said, if you improve your grades, you'll never even get to that school. And he basically decided, I'll improve my grades anyway. And, somehow, he was able to get an opportunity to go to that school. And so for me, I love those stories. I'm a natural storyteller, and I love reading stories because they help me to understand that, again, we walk in this life by faith. For me, leadership and faith are intertwined. Mm-hmm. Because we walk towards a place. When Walt Disney, was deciding on Disneyland, which he never, by the way, ever lived to see in person.
Yeah.
But it was in his mind's eye. That's what he saw, and that's what fueled him.
Yeah.
Whether it's Bill Gates or, whoever else you want to describe.
Of course.
People imagine things and say, why not? Why can't this happen? And for me, those are the most fun biographies, when you read about people who kind of look at a situation and say, yeah, but why? Why should it be that way? Why can't we have a situation where I can sit in my office and be able to, move money from my bank account to somewhere else? Yeah. Why can't I be able to, talk to my friend in Australia, okay, and see that friend at the same time? An idea which 20 years ago or 25 years ago was ludicrous. People would have laughed you out of the room. And today, sometimes the people who ask the questions, why not, are the ones who are going to create those mega changes in the future. And for me, my question of why not is, why can't everybody in Africa have access to world-class education, world-class healthcare, and frankly, the money to make it happen? Why not?
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful question. And just a third fun fact, I know you have a wonderful wife who I think has a name Renee, which is the same name as my late mother, actually. Can you share one fun, unexpected outing that you and Renee have?
I've been married for 23 years.
Yeah.
To the love of my life. We are polar opposites. But what makes us the marriage work is that we share common values. Mm-hmm. So we never argue about money. We never argue about how to raise children. None of that. but we are polar opposites. So this is, I'm a long-term planner. Honey, today's Tuesday. On Friday, we should go out.
Yeah.
And she's like, you're pressuring me.
Yeah.
Her idea is Friday evening around 7:00. Why don't we just go out? Like, but I haven't planned it. Now, so as you can imagine, when you ask me for one of those times when we spontaneously had fun, I'm probably the wrong person to ask because she'll probably remember it more. But one thing that does come to mind that I will share is just last week we went out to a buffet. Now, this is a buffet that I've been wanting to attend. And I said to her, can we go here? Nah, I'm busy this time. Okay. Asked again, I'm busy this time. Fine. One Friday, I sort of said, well, okay, let's go there tomorrow. And she's like, oh, okay. Now, I said, can we meet at 1:00 there? And she says, okay. Now, my wife is extremely busy. She's a businesswoman. And it fits with her personality because she likes things being done sort of on the fly. She showed up at 3:00 for this appointment. By which time, I was there about 2. By which time I wasn't terribly happy. But I remembered that at the end of the day, this is really about us just having time. And she works so hard.
Yeah.
And I wanted her to just get a chance to relax. So we were there, and the poor people who were the waiters, they were very kind because they allowed, the buffet usually closed at 4. We were there from 3 till 6.
Wow. A long extended lunch.
And they kept it open for us.
What was fun about it? What was the fun part of it?
What was fun about it for me was the fact that we got to just talk.
Any final thoughts around leading boldly into the future, not only in Africa, but in other parts of the world? Any final thoughts either about general leadership thoughts or just any final thoughts around what President Nelson Mandela would say to the world today?
I think my final thoughts would be, first of all, I congratulate you for pursuing this, because documenting leadership perspectives and stories is important. And I'm a beneficiary of that. If nobody had written Mandela's book or taken the time to record some of that, I would never have read about him or about Lee Iacocca or about Richard Branson, etc. So the documentation of the lessons is important because knowledge sharing is very important. As we look into the future as leaders, my thoughts are, I want every leader to answer for themselves this question: how have you grown as a leader in the last 4 to 6 months? You see, the challenge we have in many parts of the world is that as leaders, we become, sometimes complacent about growth. When you're striving to be number one in the organization, you always have a boss who's there saying, okay, this is what you need to do in order to make the next step. When you get to be the number one in the organization, there's usually nobody telling you, okay, this is what you need to do. You have to be that person for yourself. And this is where, I encourage every leader to challenge themselves to say, how am I ensuring that 6 months from now, I'm a better leader than I am today?
Yeah.
What am I doing to make sure that happens? Now, I have my own ways, which is, knowledge sharing and having a coach. But I'm not saying that has to be everybody's answer. But I am saying this, that the people you serve have a right to expect your leadership to be better 6 months from now than what it is today. And you owe it to them as a leader. Because here's the reality. The world is changing that fast. And what worked 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, is probably not appropriate today. So if you're not growing, then you're becoming outdated.
Sure.
And so my message to all the leaders is to become intentional about growth. because growth is no longer accidental, at least not after you finish teenage years. You have to be intentional about growth.
Yeah.
And as a leader, your organization will only grow as fast as you as the leader are willing to grow. And so the more intentional we are about growing, the faster our organizations will grow and the better opportunities we will create for generations yet unborn, so that we can all someday look back and smile at the Africa that we have created, or the world that we have influenced to become what it is.
Modupe, thank you so much for sharing those very powerful words. Thank you for being so intentional about your life, your leadership, truly inspiring. And thank you so much for taking the time to share those very authentic thoughts and moments with us today. Monsieur, I'm so grateful. Merci beaucoup. Au revoir until we meet again. Merci beaucoup.
Our conversation with Dr. Modupe Taylor-Pearce, who fought and was shot up during the 11-year civil war in Sierra Leone, confirms the powerful leadership value of his West Point Military Academy training. The discipline of self-discipline and practice daily habits in war, in life, and leadership that help us win battles, stay alive, and thrive. West Point is the U.S. Military Academy, founded on March 16, 1802, and is rated as one of the nation's best undergrad educational institutions by the 2023 U.S. News and World Report. But West Point is so much more than a university or a college. It is a living leadership laboratory that prepares young men and women intellectually, emotionally, and physically. It prepares them to exercise leadership with character and for a lifetime of selfless service, not only for the Army, but for the nation as a whole. Men and women in and out of uniform with mental and moral discipline. We know how hard it can be to shed those old lingering habits that no longer serve us. But what is the definition of a self-disciplined habit? Well, like a military drill, it is self-regulated and practiced. It is an automated, routine behavioral response to a trigger. The best-selling author of Atomic Habits, James Clear, shares a proven and practical habit-forming framework, which consists of 4 parts. The first, there is a cue or a trigger to act. So, for example, if you open the refrigerator and see a pack of delicious crème brûlée. The second is a craving for change. So again, if you're eating those delicious crème brûlées most nights and gaining weight, perhaps the craving for change is the loss of weight. The third is the action. It's the triggered response. Again, as an example, if there is a craving for change because of weight gain, perhaps the action is to eat healthy red berries instead of crème brûlée. And the fourth is the reward, the final step and the desired outcome. Again, in that example, the reward could be, with eating red berries instead of crème brûlée, a loss of weight, that feeling of relief and comfort when one feels healthier, and of course, wearing that hot new outfit in the closet. When we crave change, there are 7 habit-forming hacks to get those new disciplines to stick. Number 1, make those cues visible, unmissable, front and center. Change your environment. Stop buying crème brûlée and instead buy packs of red berries that sit in the front of the refrigerator. The second, be intentional and specific with your plan. Set a goal of losing, say, 30 pounds, eating salads Monday to Friday, and eating red berries instead of creme brulee. The third, the research reveals that dopamine, the feel-good neurotransmitter, is a potent motivator. The fourth, neuroscientists reveal and show us that dopamine can be triggered by the mere anticipation of a reward or something to look forward to. So pull out that hot new outfit from the closet and hold it up daily in front of the mirror to get your daily dopamine feel-good fix. The fifth, use temptation bundling. What do we mean by that? Combine an unappealing new behavior with an appealing old behavior. So, for example, if part of your plan is to work out to get fit and lose weight, while working out, you could be listening to your favorite podcast or music. Number 6, make that new habit attractive, easy to adopt, and immediately satisfying. The 7th is track your performance. Get onto the scale. Measure the number of steps or the number of miles or kilometers you do as part of your workout plan. Tiny behavioral results practice daily, deliver, and lead to big results. You too can start your own West Point Military Academy and build a positive system of daily disciplines and practice habits that combine and compound to deliver remarkable results, whether it be in war, in life, in leadership, or in our chaotic world. So until next time, remember that leading boldly is about making thoughtful, clear choices. And bold leadership is about taking bold action, just one small step at a time, one step for you, but together, a giant step for humanity. So take care and take thoughtful, bold action.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leading Boldly into the Future. Please find links and connections mentioned in this show in our blog and never miss an episode by subscribing at anne-pratt.com. That's ANNE-PRATT.com. May these insights from inspiring industry leaders, remarkable disruptors, and courageous champions of change bring forth a brand new you, emboldened, empowered, and ready to inspire hope. Come back soon, share with your friends, sign up on anne-pratt.com and join our movement for change. Why? Because the world needs you to lead boldly too.